Okay, so we are on lesson 14, project procurement management. According to the PMBOK guide, this is supposed to be the last knowledge area. This is supposed to be the last knowledge area. However, per our schedule, we decided to look at procurement management first before looking at risk management. And so the order will change for today. But what is essential is the content. Okay. Our objectives will be to define contract, discuss key concepts, tailoring considerations, trends, agile and an adaptive environment, and then differentiate between centralized and decentralized contracting. Explain the different types of contracts, identify the key terms used in procurement management, and then to describe the procurement management process. Okay. What is a contract? Comes from the Latin word contractus. Okay. And simply it means to draw together or enter into a relationship or agreement. And so we see contract as an agreement between two or more parties that create in each party a duty to do or not to do something and the right to performance of the other's duty or remedy for the breach of the other's duty. We can also say that a contract is a document. Okay, so usually when we say that you have the contract, here we are referring to the argument that embodies the document that embodies the agreement. We also note that contract must be made by parties with the necessary capacity. In other words, you can make a contract, but it will not hold, depending on the capacity. For instance, you cannot talk about a child that is a minor going into a contract. If the person is mentally not sound, you cannot enter into a contract with such a person. And so the contract must also be lawful and not criminal. So these are some of the things that makes a contract hold. Now we say that typically, for a contract to be valid, there has to be what we call consideration. Consideration usually is what is being worked for or what is going to be received in return for that which we are going to do. So if Henry and I go into a contract that, okay, Henry, build this for me. When you build this house for me, this is what you're going to get. Then the consideration is going to be what you, Henry, and I are putting in place for the contract that we're doing. There's also what we call mutuality of obligations. If I am honoring my part by building the house, you ought to honor your part by giving me the amount that is due me as we agreed. And then there has to be a meeting of the minds. Meeting of minds is necessarily here talking about a form of consensus between the two of you. If the two minds do not meet, then you cannot come into a contract. PMI defines a contract as a mutually binding agreement. Can you all hear me? You can type one if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Good, good. A contract is a mutually binding agreement that obligates the seller to provide the specified product, service, or result. It obligates the buyer to compensate the seller and represent a legal relationship that is subject to remedy in the court. So here you see in PMI, there are two key terms that we use as far as contracts are concerned. We talk about the seller and then the buyer. So for instance, I want to build a house. So I contract a certain real estate company to do the building for me. They will have their project team. So the real estate company is, in this case, the seller or the contractor. And then the owner or the buyer is the one whom that is being done for. So in this case, I will be the buyer. So what I want us to look at in this module or chapter is that we may be using seller and buyer intermittently. Why? At a certain point, the project team becomes the buyer. That is when you are trying to acquire something for the project. You know, procurement is all about acquisition of something that which you do not have. And it also involves what we call the transfer of risk. Okay, so here the project team can be the seller and at a certain point be the buyer, depending on the situation in here. I hope it is very clear. Okay, let's proceed. What are the characteristics of a contract? Like we said earlier, it has to be a formal and it has to be in written form. There need to be legal remedies. There are certain, if you are not able to do this within this period of time, then this is what will happen. Okay, what if I'm also able to do it and then you come in to bring changes? What should happen? At the end of the day, if you tell me to stop working when probably because you don't have funds or there's a change in organization strategy or whatever, what happens to me? So these are the legal remedies that we look at. When there are conflicts, how do we go about them? So these are some of the things that we're talking about here. Now, changes to contract must also be subject to the same checks as the contract itself. Before we draft the contract, go into that contract, we ensure that one or two things are in place and then we agreed upon them. If we need to change the contract, two of us need to agree before the contract changes. So if we decide that, okay, payment need to be in, let's say, a particular way, and for some reasons, you are not paying through the channel that we agreed on. If you pay me through a different channel, I need to talk about it. Is it the new way we are going? Otherwise, if you do not complain about it and then for 2, 3, 4 consecutive times, the person changed the payment options, but then you didn't complain, it is taken that you accepting it for 2 or 3 occasions, you accepted the new change. Okay, so anytime there are litigation issues, they can tell you in court that, look, the moment the change payment plan changed, you should have gone back to and then referred to the contract that this is not how we said it. If we are going to make changes, then we need to do the right thing. Okay, so it lies on you, the seller, and then also the buyer to make sure that whatever changes that we are making in the contract is subject to the same checks that it went through before getting it done. Now, we need to also note here that, you see, contract is usually managed or created and managed by contract managers, otherwise known as procurement managers or sales and purchasing and then supply department. For some organizations, and in fact in most organizations, there is this procurement department that does the acquisition. The project manager does not do that. There's also a contract manager in some organizations. And so the contract will be drafted by the department with the seller. In case you, the organization or the performing organization, you are the buyer. It is, however, important that the project manager should be involved in the process to know what the contract is all about. Because at the end of the day, he's going to manage the project. Okay. We talked about certain characteristics, and then I would like us to look at them into detail here. It said that consideration is something or an something as an act of forbearance or the promise thereof, done or given by one party for the act or promise of another. Okay. You can also look at these terms, contract, and then compare or motive. Now, in most cases, consideration is a necessary element to the creation of a contract. The consideration must result from bargaining by the parties and must be the thing that induces the mutual promises. What is obligation? A promise or acknowledgement or agreement that binds one to a specific performance, such as payment. So the seller is obliged to build the house. The buyer is obliged to make the payment. An obligation may even be a debt security or sometimes a government bond or a corporate bond. It is also what one is obligated to do, satisfy, or fulfill as a commitment to pay a particular amount of money or duty arising from law or contract or morality. And so within the project, the team is obliged to do A, B, C. Meeting of the minds, like I said earlier, is an assent to the mutually agreed upon and understood terms of an agreement by the parties to a contract that may be manifest by objective signs or objective signs of intent as a conduct. So two of us must mutually come to a point where we agree as to the terms of an agreement. Force majeure clause. What does it mean? It is a clause that says that, look, this one, so far as this thing happens, that is no fault of ours. For instance, please give me a minute, okay? There's a knock on my door. I'll be back right now. Okay.
Sure, sure.
Okay. Okay, I'm back. Are you guys there?
Yes, please.
Yes, yes. One of my old students came to say hi. Okay, so anything that we see as an act of God, like COVID, I mean, nobody anticipated that it will happen. Earthquake, okay? In that case, you cannot blame the contractor for not performing or finishing at a particular point. You understand? So that force majeure clause there is an agreement that excuses performance in the event that a force majeure, that is an act of God, makes the performance impracticable or impossible. Okay? So in that case, you cannot sue the person because he had no control over it. Now, statement of work clause. It lays out exactly what the contractor is agreeing to do. In other words, the work they are agreeing to perform, and provides clarity on what the contractor is being paid for. This is very important in the case of a lump sum contract. It also prevents disputes which may lead to litigations. You see, the SOW will lay everything that has to be done. Okay, so based on, we are going to measure you based on what we said you should do. So once you agree to do them, then we go and then check you. So when it comes to validation and all those things, that is where we're going to look at that. That is why, if you've noticed, procurement management is the last of the knowledge areas, because when we are closing the project, definitely we're also going to terminate a certain contract. Now, contract price, how much the contract is worth or the project is worth, and depends to a very large extent on the type of contract you want to go into. In other words, you may price it in a particular way, depending on whether you want it to be lump sum, whether it is time and material cost, unit price, fixed price, incentive fee. It all depends on the organization. If you are the buyer, there's a type of contract that when you go into, it positions you at an advantage. For some of the contract, the seller also benefits more than the owner or the buyer. So the pricing, and that's why I've put asterisks there, is something that we're going to look at in detail. So let's just talk about them. Then we have what we call the time of completion clause. We set deadlines, and then we decide to give either bonuses or penalties depending on how you complete. So for instance, if there are delays, then we're going to pay penalties for the delays. Okay. And then if, for instance, you finish early before, then of course, there are certain bonuses associated with that. We call something the liquidated damages. That is what you pay for the penalty of what? Delays. In some cases, they will specify that, okay, for every day that you are going to delay the project by, a certain amount of money is going to be taken from your money. Now, under this time of completion clause, there's something called substantial completion, and then what? Final completion. Substantial completion is that though the project has not been finally completed, it can still be used. You know, when you put up an apartment, when you are building a house for somebody, it may include painting the entire house. Okay, but you agree with me that once you have tiled the room, the washrooms, everything is okay, and then you've painted the inner part of the room, the people can move into the house while the project continues, depending on the agreement. In the software and agile industry, you know that the user can begin to use the solution while the agile team or the project team takes feedback from them and then works on it. So we call that one substantial completion. So typically here, there's what we call the punch list items or the finishing touches, where when I move into the house and I start using the house, and I can call you and say that, okay, I think that this door knob, there has to be some changes to this and all that. Okay. Then we have what we call the retainage. Typically, invoices are held until final completion. Final completion means that the project is completed finally. There's nothing else to be done. Okay. So in this case, when there's a retainage, then we are saying that, look, we're going to hold on to this particular invoice until the entire project is completed, then we pay you. This is to encourage the seller to finish on time, because you know that once the invoices are raised and then you pay them, there will not be any incentive to what? Finish on time because you have made the necessary payment. So there's what we call the retainage. Then there's also a milestone date or milestone date. Once we have set this particular, okay, the milestone will be that, okay, you have flowed the building and then the windows are in place. So if he gets to that point, if the seller gets to that point, that's what they are going to be giving. Now, the other thing about the time of completion clause is about payment. How are they going to be done, or how will it work? Is it going to be, are we going to say that, okay, we're going to pay you every quarter or something, depending on the arrangement between the two parties? Now, when you are giving us invoices, how often are we going to take the invoices and then make the payment? Now, on the part of the seller, he also wants to know how long you're going to make payment, because if you delay, it is going to cost him. You see, he is selling to you a certain service and then some product. He probably would also acquire the things from his tiers of suppliers, and so he needs to pay them. So once he takes the thing from them, the materials from them, and begins to work on your project, if you delay in paying him, it is going to cost him his image at a particular supplier. And so these are the things that are agreed on before we even start the contract. Now, change orders. What are change orders? You see, we want to make certain changes. Maybe when I made the quotations and the calculations and the estimates and all that, I said it was going to cost this. But when we started working and all that, things have changed and we need to, I think, look into it. Or I've seen that the rate at which I'm going, I will not be able to, the budget that I allocated for it or was allocated for the project will not be enough. So the seller will request a change order. Now, it lies on the owner or the buyer to approve it. If he doesn't approve it, then the seller must find a way of getting it done. So these are the characteristics or the component of a time of completion clause. Then there's what we call the dispute resolution system. What does it mean? Definitely there's going to be misunderstanding, dispute over one or two things. And so we are saying that our intent is that we want to build more of a relational thing than what? A transactional stuff. Yes, although we are offering you a service, you are buying from us and all that, we want our relationship to be more strategic. And so we need to build this relationship through this project by the type of contracts that we're going to establish. Now, in case there are disputes, how are we going to resolve them? A carefully or properly stipulated dispute resolution system preserves these relationships and provides durable solutions of dispute. Resolution of dispute preserves confidentiality, avoids litigation, and even maintains management control over the process. So we need to put these measures in place. Would we go to arbitration or go to court? Is there going to be an adjudicator? It is going to be stated in the contract so that once these things happen, we know the first point of contact. Okay, so these are some of the characteristics of contract. Of course, when you go into contract law or contract management into detail, you would get more understanding and more knowledge. Okay, so let's proceed. Centralized versus decentralized contracting. Before I continue, are we making progress? Is it very clear?
Yes, please.
How about the pace? Should I pace up or it's okay?
The pace is fine.
Okay, great. Henry Mens, are you there? Henry Mensah? Okay. So we are looking at centralized versus decentralized contracting. We are saying that in centralized contracting, a single contract manager handles multiple projects. However, in decentralized contracting, the contract manager is assigned to a project full-time and reports to the project manager. This is an area you should look at in the exams. What it means is that, you see, in centralized contracting, the contract manager handles several projects. So he has visibility over more than one project. But with a decentralized contracting, the contractor is the contract manager, is assigned to that project and reports to the project manager. So in a case where you are in a typical, how do you call it, matrix or functional organization, then this contract manager will report to the senior contract manager, okay? But then he has been assigned to the project, so now he reports only to the project manager. What is the difference and what is the advantage in here? With centralized contracting, there's an increase in expertise as far as the knowledge of contract is concerned, because you are not managing only one project, you are managing a lot of projects. Now, the other thing is that there's what we call standardized company practices. Since there's one contract manager managing all those several projects, there tends to be a certain standard for which these projects are managed, even though depending on the size. But there's a standard. The difficulty here is that, you see, it is difficult to get contracting help as the contractor may be involved in multiple projects. So at a time where the project manager needs this particular contract manager, he is probably solving a problem elsewhere, or he's on another project because he's not located to one particular project or assigned to one project. Now, in the case of decentralized contracting, then what happens is that there is more focus and control on the project, and it is very easy to assess such a person because he's always there with you. He has been assigned to the project and report to the project manager. But you can also see that if this project is going to last for, let's say, 3 years, or if this contract manager is assigned to particular kinds of project, then what will happen is that that contract manager will not have that expertise a centralized contract manager will have, because there is duplication of expertise. He's doing the same thing all over again. Now, there is less standardization of contracting practices from one project to another. Okay, so let us look at the difference between the two of them, and then more importantly, the advantage one has over the other. Now, a typical example is here that if British Petroleum is starting a project of setting up a new refinery plant in Nigeria, they can procure key machinery through centralized purchasing department, and then later have a full-time contract manager to procure smaller equipment locally. I hope you get it here. Okay, so let's proceed. Any question you may put one or two, you just type one there, then I'll see and then I'll respond to it. Okay, now types of contract. There are three key types: cost reimbursable, or the cost plus contract; time and material, what you usually call T&M or unit price; and then we have fixed price or lump sum. Now, we're going to look at them separately, and then as we go ahead, we look at them into detail. Now, cost plus involves payment to the seller for all legitimate actual cost incurred for the work completed, plus a fee representing the seller profit. So the project is to maybe construct a certain stretch of road. And so you're going to pay him for the estimates that he's made about the entire pricing of the road, the materials plus labor and all that. That's how much it's going to cost. Then we need to add a fee or a profit for the seller. Now, it should be used if the scope of work is expected to change significantly during the execution of the contract. Okay. Cost-based contract can be classified into the following. We have the cost plus fee, or cost plus fixed fee, or the cost plus incentive fee, cost plus award fee, and then cost plus percentage of cost fee. We shall delve into them in the subsequent slides. Then we have the time and material costing. We usually use it when you're trying to, when you are building a house, and then that is a personal thing. Depending on how you want it, you go and purchase this, you give the money to the person, okay, and then as and whatever they buy, you make payment and all that. So it is a hybrid type of contract arrangement with both aspect of cost reimbursable and then fixed price contract. It is often used for staff augmentation. So when we acquire staff, things that tend to be repetitive, okay, then we make use that, okay, we need to purchase maybe some wheelbarrows, we need to purchase all these things, okay. So as and when then the money is released, okay. The slight difference between time and material cost is that, you see, for unit pricing, we are looking at flat fees for various components. In other words, there may be various there may be a lot of project that is being done, but there is going to be a flat fee because there are things that are very similar amongst them. So we're going to say that, okay, for every square foot, this is how much we are going to pay. So we calculate and look at the project and then the number of square foot in each project and then make the payment as it is. Okay. Now with fixed price or lump sum, we are saying that it involves setting a fixed total price for a defined product, service, or as a result, or a result to be provided. Now, it should be used when the requirements are well defined and there are no significant changes to the scope, okay, are expected. So if you are very certain of the scope of the project, you really know what it is about, then you can use this one. But if you are not so sure of the scope and you know that there's going to be a change, then the cost plus is better. Now, as we move forward, we're going to know the better here. Is it for the contractor, or which is the seller, or it is better for the person buying it? Okay. Now we know that the fixed price or lump sum is usually better for the buyer, and many organizations are now inclined towards this particular one. So we have a fixed price for it. This is how much you are going to pay for the work that you're going to do. We have done our own calculations and we see that there are not going to be any changes so much. So this is how much, and then it's agreed. But with this one, you are not so sure of the changes that will come in. So if you are not careful, and then you decide that you're going to give a particular money for it, you may, in the process of time, if there's a major change, it will cost you more. That is why most of the time the FP is in the favor of the buyer, while the cost plus is usually in the favor of the seller. Now, among this is what we call the fixed price incentive fee. Okay, so you're going to do the project, but then if you are able to achieve this, we are going to give you this particular fee. Okay, maybe if you are able to cut down cost, this is how much we are going to give you in addition to what we are giving you. Then we have what we call the fixed price economic price adjusted. Here we are taking into consideration changes that may happen in the economy, so that even though this is how much we are going to pay, the rate will change if things get better in the market. If it goes high, then we need to see how we can make the necessary adjustments so that it becomes a 50-50 for both of us. That is fixed price economic price adjusted. Then firm fixed price. The firm has a fixed price that they give. And so this is how we're going to go about it. It all depends, again, on the organization. Can I continue? Henry, can I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, you see that within the cost plus, there are two key types that we want to look at. That is cost plus fixed fee, or also known, and then we have what we call the cost plus percentage of cost. Now, it means that the buyer will pay the seller back for the cost involved in doing the project work, plus an agreed amount or a fixed fee that the buyer will pay on top of that. Okay, so cost plus fixed fee, or cost plus percentage of cost, which we're going to look at. Now, if this agreed amount of fixed fee is calculated as a percentage of the initial estimated project cost, then we refer to it as a cost plus percentage of cost. In other words, if the fee that we are going to give to the seller is a percentage of the initial estimated project cost, then we will call it a cost plus percentage of cost. But if the fee is just an amount, maybe when you finish at a particular time, we are going to give you, let's say, $1,000. That $1,000 doesn't matter whether the project cost this and you were able to achieve it within this way. It is a fixed amount that you are going to be given.
Is that a question?
Yes, yes.
So the cost plus fixed fee, you said that the buyer will pay the seller back for the cost involved. Does it
Hello,
mean that
come
most
again.
times, yes, the cost plus fixed fee or the cost plus percentage of the cost, you said that the buyer will pay the seller back for the cost involved in doing the project. So my question is, in most instances, do the seller pay for such, how do you call it, for the scope of work done before then the buyer will come and reimburse the seller?
Typically, it depends on the agreement between the two of you when you started the contract. You know that in some cases, the contract is that the seller, for instance, if I'm building a house, okay, and then I contract a real estate company to do that for me, it is either you're going to give them that money, but you know that, of course, there's no way you give the entire money to the contractor to do the project. So most often than not, what happens is that there's an amount that maybe you give to the contractor to start with, based on the estimates that you've made and then all that. Okay. So we are saying that, okay, if you are able to achieve, we said that, okay, this project is going to cost, let's say, $20,000. Based on our estimate, it is going to cost us $20,000. And then now the seller will, and the contract and the buyer will say that if you are able to do the project such that you maybe spend less than this 20,000, then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give you this amount of money. So as to whether you know that definitely you don't give it is hard for the buyer to give the entire amount of money to the seller. Do you get it here? That is why, if you remember, when we're doing the cost management, we talked about funding requirement. You remember that? A funding reconciliation. That certain point within the project, some payment is going to be made. I hope you remember that one.
Yes, please.
Exactly. So depending on the agreement that you go, okay, we are looking at the total cost of the project and how you were able to either have an overrun or an underrun. It is very rare that you carry the entire amount of money of the project for the cost of the project to the seller. In some cases, the seller.
Yes, I have another. Just
Yes.
to mind.
Yes.
See, we take the cost management before
Yes.
procurement
Yes.
management.
Yes.
Yes. So I
Yeah,
want to know
Henry, can you
if it's audible.
there's a radio or television at the background there is giving us some feedback.
Okay.
Yes, yes, yes. It's not making us hear
Yes.
as well.
So is it better now?
Le-
I put it over.
It's still loud though.
So what I was saying, hello, well, let me type it. You got it, let me type it.
Okay. Yeah, it's better now.
So what I'm saying is that
Yes,
regards the cost management,
yes,
if
yes,
audit on the cost management and you realize that okay, there has to be some changes in the contract or in procurement, are you
yes.
going to use the change control to do all these things, or there are some
Exa-
type
e-
of contracts that will?
exactly. So that is where I hope you have the PMBOK guide, the 6th edition. Do you have it?
Yes, I have it. I
Good.
checked on the last
When you get to the part 2 of it, it has what we call the standard to project management, PMBOK standard to project management. You see that one, it will start from the initiating phase and take you through what happens at each process group till executing. Okay. So you see how, even though in the first part we look at it knowledge area by knowledge area, in the second part, there's an integration kind of thing. So like you asked the question, we have the funding reconciliation, we have talked about the reserves and all those things that has to be in. If in the course of execution of the project, we notice that there has to be some changes to the funds because the money that we estimated is not what actually is, then remember there has to be a change request. Is that not it?
Yes.
Yes. Now, in terms of the contract, that change request is usually called a change order. Okay, and it has to go through that change control process. I hope you get the point here.
Yes, please.
Good. Now, in contract, there's what we call the addendum. I'm sure you have come across that word before.
Yes, I believe so.
Exactly. So, it's typically, I think there's an hand up. Okay, great. It was Henry. He just responded to me. Now, we at a point in time would also make some additions to the contract. Okay, and so they become what? Addendums, right? But these addendums definitely will have to go through the necessary processes before eventually we add them to the contract. Is that not it? Aha. So that is basically what happens. Okay. While we are doing the procurement management here, you are acquiring something. What are you acquiring? Maybe you are purchasing a machine. The machine will cost something. In cost management, we would have indicated that we will acquire this thing at a particular time. I hope you get the point here.
Yes, please.
Aha. Just that how we are going to acquire it is what procurement management is about. Then cost management is about how we are going to fund that. So you see how the two of them marry.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So can I continue? Is it clear now?
Yes, clear. You can continue now.
Sure, sure. So we are saying that this fee does not change with the seller's performance. However, the fee amount can change if the project scope changes. Okay, if the project scope changes. So it all depends on the scope of the project. That is why typically we are saying that the cost plus is always an incentive for the, how do you call it, the seller. It's always an advantage to the seller. And so most often than not, if you are telling me that, for instance, say that the fee does not change the seller's performance, you don't motivate the seller to cut down cost. Is that not it? So it's like you are giving the seller the room to what? Move. Either ways, the seller will benefit in this particular case. Either ways, the seller will benefit. And so the seller would prefer this type of contract, the cost plus. The buyer, however, would not prefer this one because it will not be to their advantage. Now let's look at an example here. This cost plus fixed fee example. So here, the estimated cost of the project is $100. And then there's a fixed fee of $10. In other words, the project itself is $100. And then the contractor earns $10 for doing the work. Now, if he performs such that the actual cost is $80, then he's still going to be given his fixed fee because the fixed fee here does not depend on whether he cuts down cost or not. Do you get the point here?
Yes.
Yes. So the actual price is going to be the actual cost plus the fixed fee. So you see, $100 is an estimated cost, but the actual cost is how much was spent on it. So that is $80. And then the fixed fee here is $10. So he's going to get $90. Now, assuming we were using cost plus percentage of what? Cost contract. Then for the same contract with an estimated cost of $100, but here the fixed fee is a percentage of what? The cost. So the fixed fee percentage is 10. then we are saying that if the project was completed at an actual cost of $80, the fixed fee percentage here is percentage of the cost. What is the actual cost? So it will be what? 10% of what? 80. And that is what? 8. Is that not it? So if we add the actual cost plus the fixed fee percentage, then that is going to be 80 plus 88, and that is what? 88. So you see, in this case, for the cost plus fixed fee, the buyer earns more. Is that not it here? Sorry, the seller earns more. Have you seen it here? Yes. Now, let us look at a typical situation here. For a cost plus fixed fee, if the estimated cost is 120, then the actual price will be what? 130. In other words, you're going to add this particular fixed fee of 10 to this and make it 130. However, in the case of a CPPC, if the estimated cost were 120, then we're going to look at an actual price of 132. Why? Because you want to find a certain percentage of this, that is 10% of this 120, and then add it to it, and then you get 100 and what? 32. I hope you get it. So the percentages here as to whether it will be bigger than it or smaller than it depends on the amount involved here. So we should note that in the CPFF, the fee is fixed regardless of the cost. However, in CPPC, the fee depends on the percentage of the cost, and therefore the seller or contractor gains either ways. Hence, it is the least preferred type of contract, especially for government agencies. I hope you get it here. So the one in the box here is showing us that even though this one, the CPPC was 88 and this one was 90, when the amount of money increased, you could see here that the contractor, the contractor is getting more than in this case. And therefore, government agencies never want to go into a CPPC contract. So in the exams, they may ask you what type of contract are you going to go into depending on the scenario given. And it is always important to know which type of contract is preferred by either the seller or the buyer. Now, cost plus incentive fee versus cost plus what? Award fee. What is the difference here? We are saying that cost plus incentive fee have a larger fee awarded for contract which meet or exceed performance target, including any cost savings. So here you would want to incentivize the contractor to cut down cost. And so you decide to give an incentive fee for completing the project at a particular cost. Okay. Then cost plus award fee, it pays a fee based upon the contractor's work performance. So the difference between the two is that the amount that is paid is based on the contractor's work performance. But here, the amount given is what you said, a larger fee is awarded for contract which meet or exceed performance target, including any cost savings. They are very similar, but just that amount that the contractor is paid here is based on his performance. Okay, so it is quite confusing, but there's a difference in here. What are the advantages of cost plus contract? They eliminate some risk for the contractor or seller, and they allow the focus to shift from the overall cost, okay, to the quality of work being done. They cover all the expenses related to the project, and so there are no surprises. What are the disadvantages? For the buyer, the major disadvantage is that the risk of paying much more than expected on materials. Yeah, it is because the contractor is not incentivized to what? Reduce or cut costs. So the contractor or the seller also has this less incentive to be efficient, since they will profit in either ways. And so it is very clear here that cost plus contract, whether we try to include a fee or cost plus incentive fee, cost plus award or whatever, the buyer is at a disadvantage. Now let's look at some examples here. Cost plus incentive fee. So a typical example is here. A cost plus incentive fee contract has the following parameters. There's a target cost of $300 and a target fee or profit of $30. The minimum fee or profit is 20 and the maximum fee is 40. Then there's this share ratio between the buyer and the seller. In most cases, the share ratio is for overruns and then for underruns. In other words, if the contractor exceeds the estimated cost, the extra cost is going to be shared between the two of them based on a certain ratio. If, on the other hand, the contractor cuts down cost and then there are profit made, then what it means is that the two of them again now are going to share the profit in here. Okay. So the ratio is usually depending on what. For instance, this one is 75 is to 25. Every time the ratio is given, the percentage that goes to the buyer comes first, and then that which goes to the seller comes next. So in this case, we're only giving the share ratio, okay? And we are asked that if the project was completed at an actual cost of $400, what will be the final price? Now, if we look at the target cost, it is $300. The actual cost is what? $400. What it means is that there's an overrun. The contractor has exceeded the targeted or estimated cost by $100. And so we are saying that that overrun is the actual cost minus target. So 400 minus 300 gives us this 100. Now, we are going to adjust the seller's fee by the seller percentage of the overrun. So here, the ratio that we're given is the ratio of the overrun. Many a case, when there is underrun or profit, they share it 50-50, many a case. But when there is an overrun, the buyer tends to have the higher percentage of the cost that has been incurred. So here, if you look at it now, we want to look at the adjusted fee. That is the adjusted profit. It is going to be 25%, the ratio here, 25% of that overrun, which is 100. And how much is that? $25. Now, what is the actual fee that is supposed to be given the contractor? It is the target fee minus the adjusted fee. Please notice these metrics. What is the target fee? We have said that we are targeting giving you $30 as profit for this. And when you make an overrun, then we are going to share that overrun by this ratio. By that, we mean you're going to lose a certain amount of that estimated or targeted fee. So you see here that the actual fee that we need to give to him is 30 minus 25, because 25 is the adjusted fee, and that is $5. But now, this part, you see, we are saying that there's going to be a minimum fee of $20. What is that minimum fee? We are targeting that we will give you $30, but we will not give you anything below $20. And we're also not going to give you anything above $40. So when we calculate the actual fee, and this is not equal to the minimum, then to be fair, we are not going to give the contractor this $5. We are going to give him the $20. You see the more reason why we said that there's cost plus contract, the contractor or the seller gains either ways. So by this, then we are going to estimate the final price. Knowing that the actual fee is less than the minimum fee, we are going to give him or the contractor the $20. So the final price is going to be the actual cost of the project, which whether you like it or not, we have to pay because that is the actual cost. In other words, when we executed the project, this is how much we finally, after reconciling everything, this is how much the project cost us, $400. And we are going to add this $20 to it. So the correct answer here is C. Is it clear here, Henry?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so let me continue. How about Mensa? Is it clear? You can type in 1 so that I'll know that it is clear. Okay, Henry says that it's clear, so we continue. Great. Okay, so now let's go to the next slide. Okay, now we're going to look at fixed price incentive fee, that which we said puts the buyer at an advantage. So again, there's a target cost which we have estimated to be 500, and then there's a target profit which is $50. And so if we look at the target price, in other words, the total price of the project, it is going to be 550. However, there's what we call the ceiling price, which we shall look at in detail. I'm not going to pay anything beyond this. According to the buyer, this is my ceiling price. This is how much I can pay. Or if you go beyond this, then you should know that every cost that you are going to incur is going to go into your fee. Again, like I said, the share ratio here in terms of overruns is 80-20. 80 for the buyer, 20 for the seller. Assuming the project was completed for an actual cost of 580. The targeted cost was 500, but now it is 580, and we know very well that there is an overrun of $80. Now, the seller's profit needs to be adjusted in line with the overrun. So then we are going to find 20% of the overrun, which is 16. The actual profit now is going to be the targeted profit, which is 50, minus the adjusted profit, which is 16, and that is $34. So the final price that we're going to pay is going to be the actual cost, which is 580, plus the 34, and that gives us what? 614. But here, what did we say? We are saying that according to the contract, the ceiling price is $600. So we're going to compare this actual, for the final price that we've calculated for, to our ceiling price and see whether it lies beyond it or within. Now, since it is beyond it, the actual price is going to be what? 600. Have you seen it here? The above price, the actual price will be what? 600. Which means that it has gone beyond 600 and it's 614. But seriously speaking, the buyer is not paying the 614. Before the contract, it was agreed that this is going to be the ceiling price. So the actual price will be what? $600. That said, then it means that the actual cost is what? 580. And then the real profit is what? 20. I hope you get it here, because when we calculated, the actual cost was what? 500. In fact, that is what the project and the question said, 580. But we are paying 600. So the real profit on this is 20. If you look at it carefully, if this one were a cost plus, it was going to be a different thing, because it has what we call the minimum and then the maximum fee. And it is adjusted such that either ways the contractor benefits. You see that in this case, he made an excess of what? 14. And that goes against the contractor. But I hope you get it here.
I have a question.
Okay.
Okay, so what if the final price was more than, as in like the cost was equal to or more than the final price? That means that his actual profits will not be included. So how are you going to reimburse the contractor? And it's like a fixed price.
The background is I don't know, is it a television set or a radio? Hello?
I'll type it. Let me type it.
Okay, you type it. Type it. Can the final price be equal to the actual cost used by the contractor? So let's go back to what we have here. Okay. Okay, so Hermensa says that it is highly impossible. Now, if with what we have here, the actual cost of the project is what? 580. But there needs to be a profit. Now this 580 is how much the project, in terms of labor, you see the contractor is going to use some people and all those things, so he has to pay the workers and all that. Now that is the cost of the project, but the contractor will need what we call profit or a fee for what he has done. So if you're going to give the contractor 580, then from what we have in here, there is no profit. Do you get it here? There's no profit. So from our calculations here, then for this final price to be equal to 580, then there's no profit, whether we are looking at it as an overrun or an underrun. For this to be zero, then it means that the overrun, the adjusted profit, look at it here. Henry, I hope you are looking at it. So let me try to circle something here. Good. So let's look at this. Now, this $34 is the actual profit, and it was calculated from 20% of what? The overrun. So if the 20% of the overrun was what? $16, then the question here is 50 minus 16 gave us 34 to be the actual profit. So for the actual profit to be equal to 0, then it means that this one is going to be 50. So that will mean that we're going to find 50%, 20% of a certain value. That will give us how much? The 50 here, for the actual profit to be equal to 0. So it is possible, depending on the overrun, based on what we are doing here. But again, the human face will now come in here. Let's be very honest. I hope you get what I'm trying to say. We'll call something, and we'll look at something called point of total assumption. So Henry Mensah, from the calculations that we have done here, if you are math inclined, please do that calculation for us. 20% of a certain number will give us 50. And therefore, that number is going to be 50 divided by the 20%. So 50 divided by 0.2 gives me 250. So it means that if the overrun was 250, that will mean that the project will cost around 750. The actual cost is 750. True or false? 750. So if it is 750, good. So if the project, which is estimated or targeted at $500, now cost us 750, that was the actual cost, then we are going to look at this percentage that we agreed upon. That okay, then the seller is going to take 20% of that excess. So let's look at it here. 250 is the excess. You find 20% of 250, that is $50. Then this is what we said. So if you put it in here, 0. If you add the 0 to this one, it becomes 580. Is that not it? So No. So that would be what we said. Actual cost. What is the actual cost? 750. Okay. So let's look at this here. You see that math makes the whole thing interesting. Is that not it? So the final price is the actual cost, which is 750, minus the actual profit, which is 0. And that will give us a final price of what? 750. Then we come to our ceiling price. What is the ceiling price? The ceiling price is 600. And so the person says that, no, I cannot pay this 750. I can only pay what? 600. So now, Macam and then Henry, if the person can only pay the 600 out of the 750 that you actually, who have you benefited? Macam, hello? Can you hear me? Exactly. Okay, exactly. Okay. And the fact of the matter is that, like I said, you are also involved in project, and you know that it gets to a point where, like I said, the human face comes in. You understand? What is the amount that the buyer is going to absorb from this one? From what we see here, the buyer's share of it is going to be, the excess is 250, right? So 80% of that is, of course, if it is free, that will be 200. So in other case, both parties will lose. But typically, this is in a rare case scenario, is that not it? This is in a rare case. I'm not hearing from Macam. Henry, can you hear us? Hello, Macam. Yeah, your connection is unstable, I can see. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, so you see that we said that the final price from the formula here is the actual cost plus the actual profit. From our calculations here, an excess of 250 will mean that, or an overrun of 250 will mean that the actual profit, or the adjusted profit, let me put it that way, is $50. From our calculations here, 20% of this one is 50. If you take it from the actual profit, it means that there's no profit, 0. So what will be the total price for? So this is how much the person is supposed to pay, the buyer. 750 plus no profit is equal to 750. But there is this ceiling price in here that I cannot pay more than 600. So out of the 750, the buyer pays 600. And so if you look at it now, the seller will lose. I hope you get it here. The seller will lose. So the seller will not even see to it that. So it is very difficult, if you look at it carefully here, it is very difficult for the seller to be given an amount that is equal to the actual cost of the project. But we have what we call the, in fact, there are a lot of dimensions to this, okay? There are a lot of dimensions, and typical contract managers and then those into procurement will let you know there's more into this. These are just some gist of it. Let's go to what I was talking about, the point of total assumption. Remember, there's what we call the ceiling price. So here, this 750 has gone way beyond the ceiling price of 600. So what it means is that $150 will not be accepted by the buyer. So this $150 now goes into the profits of the seller. Because from what we saw here, there's no way the buyer is going to pay beyond this. So let's see what the point of total assumption means. What is point of total assumption? It is a point above which the seller effectively bears all the cost of a cost overrun on a fixed price incentive fee contract. The seller bears all the risk at PTA and beyond due to what we call a dollar for dollar decrease in net profit for cost in excess of the PTA. Up to the target cost, the buyer pays 100% of the cost. Okay, up to the target cost. So let's look at this one, for example. This is the target cost. How much did the buyer pay eventually? 600. If you look at it carefully, 100% of this 500 has been paid. Is that not it? Good. So when we go back, we are saying that up to that target cost, the buyer pays 100% of the cost. Now, between the target cost and then the PTA, which is the point of total assumption, additional costs are shared between the buyer and the seller based on the share ratio. So, like we said, we have seen the share ratio. Now, above the PTA, the seller or contractor pays 100% of the what? Additional costs. In addition to its share of the cost, the buyer will also pay the seller its fee or profit. The PTA is therefore the difference between the ceiling price and then the target price divided by the buyer's portion of the share ratio for that price range plus the cost. So this is the formula. What is the targeted cost? So in the first case that we looked at, where we made an assumption that assuming the project costs 750, we know that the target cost is 500. The ceiling price is 600. Then we are looking at the target price. What is the target price? From what we have here, target price is what? Target profit plus the total target cost. So in this case, our target price is 550. So we come in here and we input our 550 here. Then what is the buyer's share? The buyer's share is 80%. So that is 0.8. So we'll look at what we call the PTA of this one. So you have your calculators there. You can do that calculation here. 500 plus into bracket 600 minus 50, that is 550, all over 0.8. And that gives us a PTA of 1,187. I don't know whether you're also getting the same thing, $1,187. Please check whether you're getting the same thing. You just type 1 for me to know that that's what you're getting. Hey, please, I've made a mistake here. Let me correct it. If you can see, the target price is not 50, please. The target price is 550. 550. So let me correct it, please. I hope you've seen it here. Yeah, so let's make the necessary correction. Okay, target price is 550. So let me go back and then, so here the difference between them is going to be 50. Okay. Good. So our point of total assumption is this 562. Does it tally now with what you have? Good. So it means that, great. So what it means is that at this point and beyond, it says that the point beyond which the seller effectively bears all the cost of a cost overrun on a fixed price incentive fee contract. He bears all the risk at this due to a dollar for dollar decrease in what? Net profit. So you see what is going to happen here. So even though so then let us look at how much the person is going to take. If we're going to look at it that the seller is going to pay 600, then maybe when we take that deduction from it, 600 minus this, then we are looking at something around $37.5. Okay, so let's continue and see how we're going to look at it. So this is the graph here. You may come across this graph. The formula we know, so cost and price against what? Time. The cost curve, remember the cost curve is an S curve. So if you went through the slides, you always see that the cost curve is an S curve, and that is the cost curve. In other words, the cost baseline, is that not it? Then you see this one is the price or the actual what? Price curve. So look at it here. We have at a point where the buyer covers all the cost, and then we have where the seller covers all the cost. Okay, so at the point of total assumption and beyond, so this is the point of total assumption. At the point of total assumption and beyond, the seller is going to bear all the cost. And we see a decrease in the seller's what? Profit. Okay. So we are saying that increase of what? Seller's loss. Look at the region here. Okay. So this is a typical curve that talks about what? So you see where the seller gains. The seller is gaining here. Okay. At this particular point, the seller is gaining. But from here going, you see that the seller is what? Losing. And we'll see the seller's area of what? Of profit. So let's take this into consideration. And I will also suggest that there are other materials that you can read on this contract management or the procurement management, and then other areas, even with regards to the cost management. There are other materials. Don't just stick to the PMBOK guide. Okay. So I've given you the source of this. You may go there and then read more on it. But let's see how the point of total assumption calculation goes into the profit that the seller is going to get or not. Now, if the fixed price incentive fee contract is well designed, then between the PTA and when the cost equals the selling price, the seller should still be in a profitable position. However, with what? Reduced profit. It is only after the cost exceeds the selling price, or sorry, the selling price, should the seller be in what? A loss position. The selling price is a calculation from the buyer's perspective, and it is the maximum amount the buyer will pay. Then there's this thing called the guaranteed maximum price, okay, which is usually used in construction and then areas outside the US. The concept of a guaranteed maximum price is similar, but is created by the seller offering the GMP to the buyer. The buyer offers the ceiling price that beyond this, I am not going to pay any amount. Then the seller offers a guaranteed maximum price to the buyer, which we shall look at into detail. So when the project reaches the GMP, any additional costs are borne by the seller. If the costs come in under the GMP, there is a profit share between the seller and then the buyer. We talked about these, so share ratio and all that. I will not talk into them because we have looked at what they are. Ceiling price, we talked about what ceiling price is. The maximum the client is expected to pay regardless of cost overruns. And it is normally defined as the target price plus a percentage. It may be adjusted for authorized scope changes and other approved variations to the contract. You see, like you asked earlier, Henry, when there is a change in the scope or there are some variations that we have identified, then we go through the change request and then the necessary changes have been approved. And that is why we say they are authorized scope changes. Once this thing happens, you cannot say that you are still keeping your ceiling price at where it is. Whatever change that was made was going to affect the time. It was not only going to affect the scope, it was going to affect the time or the schedule. And it would also automatically affect what? The cost. You understand here? And so once these things happen, we need to adjust the ceiling price. Okay. The calculation of the ceiling price is what? The target cost plus the buyer's share of the cost overruns plus the seller's profit. So please note that TC, which is the target cost, plus the buyer's share plus the seller's target profit, and that is equal to the ceiling price. Okay. Sure. Not all changes comes with cost bearing. Some, of course, are negligible, so we will not do that. Sure, that one, no two ways about that. Okay. Now we are looking at the guaranteed maximum price, or GMP. And like I said earlier, it is used outside the US and represents the maximum project value after which the buyer has no more money to pay. You get it here? The maximum value for the project, after which the buyer has no more money to pay. It is usually set in the contract and a profit share agreed for the expected cost underruns. These contracts may include target cost and other elements similar to a FPIF contract, or may simply include a share ratio for any cost underruns. I am yet to come across a GMP question, okay? But you never know when a GMP question may surface. Because even when you go through the PMBOK guide, you hardly see the PTA there. Okay, so that is what I said earlier, that I needed to add them, because there's nothing as going to sit in the exams room and then you believe you've done 100% preparations and you get there and there's a question you have never even seen before. So this is something on guaranteed maximum price. It is a proposal that is initiated by the contractor. So that is a point that we need to look at. It has schedule of values. In other words, a list of line items that break the project into specific areas of work, for example, roofing, foundation, and the contractor will estimate a price for each line of item, which will include the cost plus the markup. So for instance, foundation will cost this. When I raise it to window level, it will cost that. To lintel level, it will cost that. To this, it will cost that. Or this stretch of road, maybe 10 meters of it will cost this. When we do it up to this point, it will cost that. And there's what we call a markup or a profit added to the actual cost of it. But in some cases, typically what the sellers will want to do is to have these GMPs for the entire project. Now, if for instance, you tell me that the foundation will be up to this amount plus the profit, then what it means is you're telling me it's also going to take you a certain amount of time. I do not expect that if, for instance, we have marked the actual cost plus the profit to be $550, and then we are saying that this one is, let's say, $250. Usually they add some buffers to these. So assuming that a buffer has been added to it for contingency purposes, let's say $5, I'm just making an assumption. The buyer would want to see that you spend within these. You are not expected to carry forward any cost or overruns into the next one. Once you finish this, we come to this point and then tackle it. However, the seller always wants to be given this one for the entire project so that they can hover around this, so that, okay, fine, this thing is supposed to cost $550 plus or minus $5. Then I spend, let's say, $600. Then what I'm going to do is that this one cost $250. So I'm going to work such that now that I have the bulk of the money to work with, and it includes this $250, I am going to use part of this $250 on this project and try to squeeze such that I'm going to live within this. Do you get it? So typically, this is how the seller would want to. That is why we are saying that it is always proposed by the contractor. Then the ceiling price is proposed by the buyer to be at a safer side. So the buyer may require a GMP for a line item which ensures that the seller works within the budget or fund and does not transfer overruns to other items. So this is what the buyer will do to ensure that this person does not transfer the excesses to other items, because in that case, it may affect the quality of work that is going to be done here. The seller, on the other hand, may require a GMP for the whole project, like I said, so as to shift cost between the line items. Typically, whenever we talk about the GMPs, the issue of contingency comes in here. Like I said, a GMP is usually the actual cost plus the profit and then the contingency. So assuming the actual cost is $500, the profit here is, let's say, $50, and then the contingency is 5. So then if we are looking at the GMP, it is 555. Okay. So what do we add these contingencies for? Remember, when we were looking at cost management, we talked about what we call management reserve and then contingency reserve. So after you have baseline and done all the how do you call it, the control account and all of that, you put what we call the contingency reserve on top. Is that not it? And then when you've put all the other packages together, the cost, then the management reserve is put on top of the baseline. Now, the cost, the contingency here, also known as the contingency reserve, is for what we call the known unknowns. Uncertainties that we are very familiar with may happen. Now, if we set aside this $5 as a reserve, and that unforeseen event that we have predicted does not occur, then you cannot use this $5 as a contractor. And so it needs to go back to the owner. You get it now? Remember that we are able to calculate for this contingency reserve based on what we call the expected monetary value, EMV. We calculate the EMV from the risk, the probability of the risk that is going to occur, by how much it is going to cost us. So assuming that this particular risk is 20%, in other words, it has a 20% chance of occurring. And when it occurs, we are going to lose, let's say, $10,000. Then the EMV here is going to be 20% of this 10,000, and that amount is going to be the EMV. You know that this is negative, and so if you find 20% of 10,000, then we are looking at a minus 2,000. Is that not it? Dollars. A minus $2,000. So assuming that for the entire project, this was the expected monetary value, then we are going to put aside, say, $2,000 as a contingency for this particular risk that we are anticipating. I hope you get the concept here. So like I said earlier, the knowledge areas tend to integrate actually. And if we've not done risk management, how are you going to know the risk or the unknowns that you expect in the project? So definitely, EMV is a concept that we'll talk about in risk management. But the fact that we're talking about contingency reserve, it had to come in here for us to know how these monies are going to be put aside. Okay, now we are saying that sellers usually want little accountability as possible. and therefore they need to be incentivized to cut costs and use the reserves wisely. It is not in the interest of the seller to cut down cost unless you choose a particular contract that he knows that or she knows that if they do not cut down costs, it is going to go against them. Okay. Allowances, change orders, dispute resolution procedure. I think we've talked about dispute resolution procedure, how we're going to resolve dispute that arises. And then we talked about change orders. Now you see that under these change orders is what we call the known unknown or the management reserve. Management reserve. You cannot touch the management reserve. But for the contingency reserve, it has been allocated for that purpose. So when it comes in, you need to use it. There's no need going to ask permission to. The fact is that it has been placed there for it. So all you need to do is to document that this is what happened and it was used. But for the management reserve, a change order needs to be what? Issued by the contractor. If the owner or the sponsor agrees, then he may use the management reserve. So we are saying that a process built into a contract whereby the owner and the contractor under mutual agreement increase the price or the time to complete the project based on unforeseen events, changes to scope usually requested by the seller and approved by the owner. Okay, so here we usually use what we call the management reserve. And like I said, this management reserve can never be used until the unknown unknowns come in. There's a tsunami, so this is what now has happened. Then now we go into our management reserve to use that money to complete the project or do what is supposed to be done. Now, allowances are set aside for decisions that the owner or buyer must make later in the project. And this is what it means. Say we set aside $1,000 allowance for a particular item. Now, if the owner selects any item that is $500, then there's what? A balance of $500. Is that not it? And this $500 goes off the guaranteed maximum what price? Because you see, you are giving me a price that I should pay. But in the price here, you said that, okay, if we are going to buy, let's say, a refrigerator, or let's say a certain generator, it is supposed to cost $1,000 on the high side. But depending on the type that this buyer wants, he may buy it at $500. So if he buys it at $500, then we have to take this $500 off the guaranteed maximum price in favor of the owner. However, if the owner selects an item more than that 1,000, then this increases the price, the total price of the contract. So if you choose something that is around 1,002, then you'll be made aware that the allowance for this thing was 1,000. So if you are taking 1,002, then the excess of 200 is going to be part of the total price of the contract. So allowances are set for cost of materials or a particular decision that the owner will make. And therefore it lies on the owner in this particular case to cut down cost. I remember during my project, the estimate was given based on the type of material the contractor suggested. When you got to the point where we were like, no, I think when we use this type, it is better. It changed the total cost. And that one, the contractor is not going to pay, you will pay. I hope it is clear here. Is it very clear? Okay. Now, the final point we should note here is that contingencies, allowances, and then change orders help in planning for uncertainties. Okay, so how do you take care of uncertainties in your project? By making available what the contingency reserve, the change orders or the management reserve, and then the allowances. Okay, this is not so necessary. When you get the slide, please read the difference between GMP and then ceiling price. You can read that one. Okay, point of total assumption. So this is a typical example. Just pick this one and then continue. So just as we looked at, we were able to calculate the point of total assumption as what? 562. 562.50. I think we did that earlier. So this is the, how do you call it? PTA. And we are saying that the actual cost of the project is irrelevant in the case of what? Point of total assumption. So the actual cost does not come in here. You can see clearly. It doesn't come in here. Even when we are calculating, we don't look at it at all. Okay. So the point beyond which the seller begins to take care of all the cost is here, 562.50. So he, the seller, is aware, or she is aware, and then make sure it doesn't get to that point. Okay. There's also another example which you can take and then go through. Okay. We can read through this one, and then this is what I want us to look at. You see here, we are trying to explain what it means and all that, but we've talked about that earlier. So when you get the slide, you may want to go through it. But let's look at the practical implications of PTA. It means that the seller is fully profitable up to the target cost. Above the target cost, the seller gets a reasonable payment against the additional cost and still gets the full fee. Now, at the PTA and beyond, the seller starts to cut into what? Profit, because the seller now assumes all. Please, I will update this. The seller now assumes all of the cost overruns. And if costs keep rising far enough, we'll start to operate at a loss, as we saw in that calculation. Now, the buyer share of cost overruns above the point of total assumption is, you remember, we said that it is a certain ratio. Let's say 75 for the buyer and 25 for overruns. But above PTA and above, the buyer has no percentage of it. All of it goes to the seller and he has to pay. Business scenario. Scott is the project manager for a global project, which is very demanding and critical to his company. His project sponsor is confident in his team's ability to finish the project under budget and ahead of schedule. To manage the huge fund, huge demand, Scott has to make a decision to procure additional resources. The additional resources will be responsible for activities requiring specific skills, which his project team lacks. One of the reasons why we procure. The customer has an incentive clause in the project agreement that yields a bonus for early completion. Scott has a vision for the work the additional resources will complete, but there is also an opportunity to expand their scope of work, especially if he runs into scheduling problems that will require him to crash the critical path. What contract should Scott establish to procure the additional resources? What do you think is the type of contract that is important here for Scott to use? You may type into the chat box and then. Yes, what type of contract? Can you hear me? Hello? Okay. Okay, so Henry Mensah, if you can hear me, what type of contract would you go into if you were Scott? You can type in the chat box based on the information given here. Okay. Okay. How about Henry Macam? What type of contract? Macam, can you hear me? Okay. We've lost Macam, so let's continue. Okay. Although Scott wants to complete his project early so that the team can receive the bonus for early completion, he has to pick a contract that is less risky and based on the scope of work. Out of the available contracts, the best that he can use is time and material contract. It gives him more flexibility. Okay. Fixed fee contract will require a well-defined scope of work, and time and material is the only option that accommodates open-ended arrangement. Aha. Okay. So you look at whether the scope of work is very clear. In other words, it is well defined. There will not be any changes whatsoever. But in this case, from what we saw here, he would need additional resources. And remember that we said that if you need to be procuring additional resources like labor and all that, then this is what we call the time and material cost. Okay, so you have to use that one. Okay. The advantages and then disadvantages of the types of contract here. Okay, so we have seen that in some cases, it is, for instance, the cost plus is less costly. okay, because the seller does not have to account for the risk. It's very simple and all that. The disadvantage is that it requires auditing all the seller invoices and thus increases buyer effort. Because if you are not careful, since you are going to pay for the cost, you don't really know the scope of the work and all that. It's not so clear. The seller's invoices must be looked at. Okay. Then we are saying that he doesn't have any incentive to control cost. Now the fixed price, it is efficient as the seller has that efficient incentive to what? Reduce cost, but it requires less effort by the buyer to manage the contract, because you see here the seller knows that if he doesn't manage the cost well, it will go against him. But the disadvantage is that he may underquote, okay, the price initially, so that when he underquotes the price, he can later try to make high margins on change request. You see, so, and it says that not having a proper statement of work can result in the seller not providing some of the deliverables, because you require to have a clear statement of work. Time and material is easy to create. It is good for resource augmentation and all that. Now, the seller has no incentive to control cost. You need to require every penny he spends, and it's very, very cumbersome. Okay, for very large projects, you cannot use this one. There are some key terms. What is request for information, request for proposal, request for quotation, request for bid, and then purchasing order. These, I believe that if we want more information from the seller, okay, it is used to get sellers information to see their capability. Then you ask them to bring their proposal, okay, which you can go through. Okay, then the quotation is used to get quotation for perspective on a standard product or services. Once they give, then now they can bid for the contract. And this one is usually, it says that used by buyers to get bids from what? Shortlisted sellers. Once they have provided up to this point, we can know which ones we will call to bid. Purchasing order is the simplest type of commercial contract. Okay, it's usually used for small purchases. Okay, all these things we can go through them as we read them. Okay, and so we just have to look at trends and then emerging practices in project procurement management. Advances in tools. Now these days there are a lot of softwares that we are using. Okay, there are more advanced risk management procedures and then resources. Okay, and then the way we contract is also changing. Okay, and then the typical logistics and supply chain management now is even changing. Okay, many engineering and then construction projects are done through multiple international contractors. Okay, information flow and material flow now has also, to a very large extent, changed, and it has become very critical to successful completion of the project. The use of technology as well as stakeholder relations has also become very relevant here. Okay, especially when it is a publicly funded project. And we are saying that we also even use webcams. We need to see what is going on and all that. Trial engagement. Not every seller is well suited for the organizations, and therefore some project will engage several candidate sellers for initial deliverables and work product on a paid basis before making the full commitment to a larger portion of the project scope. Okay, so we just put them on try. Tailoring consideration. What is the complexity of the project will determine the complexity of the procurement, right? Look, fiscal locations tend to also affect the type of procurement that we do. Government and regulatory environment also affect, yes. And then ability of contractors. Are there the availability of contractors? Sorry, are there available contractors who are capable of performing the work? These are things that you need to look at. Ghana here we have the PPA, Public Procurement Act. That is not the same thing that is used in Togo. Therefore, if you have a project that runs across Ghana, Togo, and another country, you need to look at all these things and then take them into consideration. For agile and adaptive environment, like we said, there's a way we look at how procurement are done. There's always a collaborative working relationship, okay, and it leads to the sharing of the risk involved in procuring stuff, okay. And so, like I said, as the seller is working on the project, there's an ongoing feedback from the seller and then from the buyer. And so the risk involved is minimized to a very large extent. Okay. Large project may use an adaptive approach for some deliverables and a more stable approach for other part. Okay, a governing agreement such as Master Service Agreement, MSA, may be used for the overall engagement, with adaptive work being placed in an appendix or supplement. It all depends. So if you are within the agile environment, there's a way you go about the procurement management. Now to what we are actually looking at. There are only 3 processes, so we'll just finish that soon. It's late, so I'm sure that once we finish this, we may have to look at risk management tomorrow or another day. Tomorrow will be very good so that we can finish fast. Now we are saying that project procurement management includes the processes. Yeah, good. Project procurement management include the processes necessary to purchase or acquire product or services or results needed from outside the project team. So we should need to look at whether we are getting a thing inside or outside the project team. Okay. It helps in determining the type of contract to be used and guides in managing the contract with the sellers. There are 3 main processes. We plan procurement management, we conduct procurement, and we control procurement. Plan procurement is in the planning process group. Conduct procurement is in the executing, and then control procurement is in the monitoring and control. Now, what are the input into plan procurement management? We have the project charter, business document, project management plan, project document, EEF, and then OPA. You know that the project charter sets the tone for the project. Okay. There are business document, other contract document, all those things there go into the project management plan, the cost management, the schedule. All of them are required because we know which resource to acquire outside of the project team and all that. We need an expert's judgment. I mean, if you have a contract manager or a purchasing and supplier expert, why not? You contact him. So we gather data, we do data analysis, and then of course source selection analysis. Where are we going to get what? How are we going to do it? All these things are going to be done. And we do these things usually within meetings. Now, when we are planning procurement, we are saying that we are documenting project procurement decisions, specifying the approach, and identifying potential sellers. So once we have planned this, the first thing we come out with is a project procurement plan. Then there's a strategy, project procurement strategy, the bid document, the statement of work, source selection criteria. What is the criteria by which we are going to select? Make or buy decision. At this point, are we going to make it within or we are going to buy it? Independent cost estimate, change request, project document update, and then OPA update. Then we go to conduct, which belongs to the executing project process group. Now we are going to acquire the thing ourselves, do the acquisition or the procurement itself. So the project management plan, which includes the project procurement management plan, project document, procurement documentation, seller proposals, EEFs, and then the OPAs will serve as the input. And then the tools and techniques here will be the judgment, expert judgment. We would have to advertise because now we want to bid. Is that not it? We are looking for bidders. So there are advertisement that goes on. Then as people bid, we have bidder conferences where we meet to go through whatever they brought and then probably explain things further. Then data analysis. Okay. As we go through, we're also analyzing the data that has been provided. Interpersonal and then team skills. Of course, the bidder conferences will require us to have interpersonal relations and then team skills. What are the output? Now, we will now have sellers that have been selected, agreements that we go into or the contract with them, requests that need to be made based on the conferences, and then welcome back, Henry. And then the project management plan update, project document update, and then the OPAs. Now we go to the final process, and that is control procurement. Control procurement is the process of managing procurement relationships, monitoring contract performance, and making changes and corrections to the contract as possible. And it belongs to the monitoring and controlling process group. I remember initially there was close procurement, but the argument is that you may not necessarily, you may have finished the project, but you haven't, you wouldn't have to close the procurement or something like that. So it was taken out of the processes. So we have only 3 processes now. You plan, you conduct, and then you control. Now, what goes into the control procurement? Project management plan, the project document, the agreement or the contract, procurement documentation, okay, the change requests that were raised and now have been approved, the work performance data. Like we said, work performance data includes how much has been spent at a particular point and all that, what has been done and what has not been done. Okay. Enterprise environmental factors, factors within or without the organization that impact the procurement process. PPAs, okay, if you are in Ghana, all these things tend to have effect on our procurement processes. Then artifacts within the organization or template or other things within the organization, as the OPAs for procurement management. So while we are controlling the project, the procurement, what are the tools and the techniques here? Data analysis, audit. You're going to audit the invoices, audit a lot of things. You have to inspect the work that has been done. Okay, claims administration. When the invoices are, of course, given, they need to make claims. Okay, so how are we going to do that? And then expert judgment. Now we expect that after we have gone through all these, we should come out with procurement that have been closed. And that is why we did not move. So you see here, so we close procurement is no more a process on its own. Do you get it here? So closed procurements that have been closed, work performance information based on the work performance data, procurement documentation update, change request, and the project management plan update, the project document update, and then of course an update to the OPAs. So that is it for project procurement management. Now we have seen that a contract is a mutually binding agreement obligating the seller to provide a certain product or service or result, and of course obligating the buyer to make the necessary monetary payment or other consideration in return. We looked at what centralized contracting is and what decentralized contracting is, and the advantages thereof in having centralized contracting or decentralized. That there's always something new to learn under centralized contracting, so the expertise increases. But the disadvantage is that if you need the contract manager at a particular time, you may not get him because he is assigned to several projects. However, with decentralized contracting, there's more of a duplicity of effort, and I mean, the contract manager doesn't get to learn a lot. But the advantage to the project manager is that since he's assigned to the project full time, he is always available to deal with contract related issues. Three key contract types are the cost reimbursable or cost plus, time and material or unit price, and then fixed price or lump sum contract. Now, the procurement management processes include the processes necessary to purchase or acquire product or services or result needed from outside the project team. And there are three key processes within project procurement management. Plan procurement management in the plan phase, then conduct procurement, which belongs to the executing process group, and then control procurement, which lies in the monitoring and control process group. Okay, so the knowledge check, as usual, I have uploaded the test. Harry Khan requested that we reduce the time so that at least okay, so I would reduce the duration of the quiz so that we can have every day, and that is what the plan is that right after we have gone through all the sessions, we're going to have daily practice tests. Okay, for some of them, there may be links that I'll send you to certain places to go and try. Okay, some will be what we create by our own self. That is, I'll upload on our testing site. Okay, so Henry Makam, before you joined, we agreed that looking at the time, we would continue with the risk management tomorrow. Is that okay by you? Makam? Henry Makam? Oh, okay. Okay, so he's here, but I think he's not getting us. Yes. Okay. So, Henry, Mensa, let's agree to end here. Okay. And then I would encourage you to read through the slides once again. God willing, tomorrow, when we meet, we'll look at the risk management, and then you can take the quiz. But there's, I think, practice test. You have a backlog there. If you check there's another practice test, I think practice test 3 or so that you have not done. Okay, the first one was on Edmodo. The second one was what you did. I uploaded another one, and then I just recently uploaded one that is 100 questions. Sure, sure. Find time and do that for me. Okay. 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 So thank you so much for making this lecture a success and this class a success. Definitely, God willing, tomorrow, let's make time and finish this and then do the tutorials and then discussions. Okay. I wish you all the best. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much. Okay. So good night then. Okay. Good night.